Hello, I am Laura Hubka, and I'm a milliner in Chicago. And today I'm welcoming you a little into my studio in my career.
Would you like to introduce your hat?
Oh, I, I always like to introduce my hat. So this hat has kind of become a signature piece of mine. It's a style called a button, and this button has little velvet flowers on it. And they're such a treasure. I actually get them from a woman who has flowers that were made in the 30s and 40s. So when I get them from her, they have the paper tags on them, and the tags have just become parchment, and they have made in Japan or made in the Czech Republic, and it's really neat. So the flowers I get to use are definitely treasures, and these are some of them.
How did you decide that textile, fiber, is your medium?
Almost by accident. I was very interested in painting. I was very interested in drawing. I loved using my hands for fine arts, but I found I wasn't very good at it. What I really excelled in those areas was colors. And almost by accident, I got myself in a little bit of trouble at home. And in an effort to kind of make peace with my mother, I would stay up late at night with her, helping her sew my sister's dance costumes. My sister was a performer. So I learned to sew very organically by watching my mother sew and helping her sew my sister's dance costumes. And I kind of started to fall in love with the art. And I started very simply by making myself my own clothes and went to school for clothing design as an occupation after high school. And by a series of events, I ended up getting a really terrible haircut and decided to use my flat pattern sewing techniques to try to make some very simple things for my head. So I went to school for fashion design. What I found was that there was very little as far as millinery instruction to be found when I was a student. This was before the internet. So I had to do things the old-fashioned way. I had to go to the library at my school and find some books on millinery. And the problem was there was no context clues. A lot of these books were written in the 40s and named materials and supplies that I had no idea what they were, and I had very little way to find out. So I found one of the few hat supply companies in Chicago, this little old church lady hat shop on the west side of the city. And I just kind of showed up at their door one day looking for hat making supplies. And they were very kind and very educational and tried to encourage me where they could. But I then kind of through them found a woman teaching at a local fashion college. And I took a class with her, but that's all that was offered. But then she was offering another class at another fashion college. And I signed up there and took the same millinery class with her again there. So prior to being able to do things like take online classes, and gosh, back then finding a millinery workshop was something I was never able to do. I don't think they existed. I had to do things the old-fashioned way and do a little boots on the ground stalking. I just found an instructor and chased her everywhere I could. I was just a sponge.
Millinery requires a lot of patience. It's very meticulous. It puts a big strain on your eyes and your hands.
Absolutely. I'm realizing that now that my career is past the 20-year mark. I have an orthopedic hand doctor on speed dial because my hands are starting to show what happens after 40 hours a week of hand sewing, and now the social media element that goes to support the business requires me using my hands to be on the computer, even though it's my least favorite part of my occupation. It's what helps propel my brand forward. So my hands are definitely showing a little wear, and my eyes definitely get a little tired, but I might start to slow down a little bit, but I'm determined that I can keep it going. Hopefully it's all muscle memory by now, because even when my hands aren't as comfortable with it as they used to be, the work is still fantastic.
Do you collaborate?
I tend to collaborate with artists who understand that my skill set isn't necessarily copying what's on a drawing. I get a lot of designers and other brands that kind of have a vision and let me do a little bit of freeform they have an idea, a concept, and they kind of let me fill in the broad strokes. So I think that works best when I work with other designers or even clients when they have bespoke pieces they want made. I feel like I do my best work when they come to me with a photograph of the dress they want to wear, or maybe a photograph that inspires them. And then, of course, I need to see an image of them, and then letting me kind of paint around what they're giving me, work with the garment they're going to wear, work with their natural beauty, and then design something that's going to brighten both of those elements.
Did you study fashion as well?
I did. I actually thought that I would design ball gowns. That was my area of interest. I loved couture gowns. I loved the finery of the materials and the level of detail. Charles James, a 1950s dress designer, gown designer, was a huge inspiration to me. And that level of detail was what attracted me. Understanding that a sculptural gown has to be still comfortable, still something that's flattering to the body. I mean, gowns can be very, very extravagant, but a woman still needs to be able to stand up, sit down, go to the powder room, ride in a car. A lot of those elements also go into millinery. The prettiest thing in the world, you can put it on your head, but if it's not comfortable, you're not going to keep it there. And if it doesn't make you feel good, you'll never wear it out of the house. You'll never want to be photographed in it. It has to be almost like choosing a lipstick or a pair of eyeglasses. You're asking someone to look you right in the eye, look right at your face. And in order to put something on your face, you have to have a certain balance. So there's all kinds of formulas about height and size and colors and angles, and it's a lovely balance to find. When it works fantastic.
How do you adjust to the demands or the tastes of today?
It's a really good question. Definitely keeping things comfortable has become, I think, more important than ever, because society doesn't have us wearing fancy hats or elevated fashion every day. When we're dressed up for special occasions, we still want that level of comfort. We're a very comfortable society when it comes to dress so much of the time. So I think that's really an important element, to keep things fresh and contemporary, keeping things lightweight. I think definitely hats having an element of movement to them visually, whether it's a little veiling that kind of gives this kind of, breath and smoke around the lines of the hat, or feathers or flowers, or a brim that swoops, things that create lyrical movement. Definitely keep hats kind of fresh and modern, but I always love a nod to vintage. I think that was the heyday of fine millinery. And I think that we're in a lovely time with millinery right now, but I think that the skill and the quality of the 1930s and 40s was just something so flattering and so beautiful. And I try to still put that in my very modern fashion today.
I noticed that you matched your hat with your lipstick. And I like the style. It's bold.
Thank you.
Does this define you?
I think so. Today, when I was trying to think of what to wear, I thought to myself, what's the most Laura Hubka thing to wear? And to me, it's a button hat and a strong lip. I love the way it makes me feel. I feel feminine and professional, but I can still work all day in it. When I'm doing events, when I'm selling my hats, I feel like this represents who I am as a designer and as a woman.
Let's talk about the palette that you use in your art.
I'm definitely inspired by the materials. What my suppliers have every season is where I need to start from. I need to go with the raw materials that are available for the season and that kind of speak to me. And it can come from cooking. Oftentimes desserts are fantastically inspirational. Talk about gorgeous color palettes. Look at a fine dessert and something that's decorated beautifully. They come from nature, they come from fashion, but finding the raw materials in millinery is really a challenge. And I am able to dye some of my own materials, but I often like to start and see what my millinery supply companies have as far as their palettes, and see what is speaking to me and kind of move from there. And then I start to incorporate all different elements, what vintage flowers I'm able to find, perhaps a piece of jewelry that's been sitting on my work table that I think is ready to become a focal point on one of my hats, or a bit of ribbon, a little feather. So I kind of just put together a really beautiful hoard and then start looking at the shapes that I have to work with, and start putting the two together, seeing what color and what silhouette are going to speak to me that season.
What's a typical day of a milliner?
It's a fine balance between being a designer and being a businesswoman, which I think is sometimes the hardest part, because I'm much more interested in the making part than necessarily the business part at times. But in order for me to be able to continue my art, I also need to sell my art. And then that facilitates making more pieces. So I generally spend my early mornings getting my computer things out of the way, responding to emails like any other business, seeing what supplies I need to order, whether it's hat boxes or a little veiling, something for a custom order. And then I spend my day in my studio. And there's many different steps when it comes to making a hat. So I tend to try to do things in an order that would make sense, because some of the process is very messy. So I might start my Monday doing all the messy things, and then that way it gives them time to dry for a day or two, get my hands nice and clean for the next day. When I'm perhaps doing hand sewing, that would be the next step in the process for making a lot of these pieces. And you can't go from working with a dye that stained your hand into sewing on a white hat. The dye would transfer. So sometimes there's a logical series of events, and things take time to dry, or colors to cure when you're dyeing them. And sometimes I need to just let things rest for a day or two. So perhaps I shape the hat, I blocked it, I sculpt it, it dries, I do all the inner finishings, and then it's time to trim the hat. And usually I do that towards the end of the week, the trimming and the finishings. And that can be where it gets a little tricky, because if I've made a lovely fedora and it's wired and it fits and it checks all the boxes, it's ready to be trimmed, there's almost a limitless amount of ways that you can trim that hat. And so for me, I often have to lay the trims on it, walk away, perhaps work on something else for a little bit, and then come back to it, because it could be that that hat needs a ribbon. It could be that hat wants a scarf or a flower or a little beading. There's just so many options. Sometimes I know immediately what I would like it to be, and then I put it together and it just doesn't feel right. So that's kind of the trickiest part for me, even after all these years, is the final finishing. Even little details like what kind of ribbon I'm going to put inside, or what kind of lining, if it's getting one. Those little details are what really make things special in my collection, and I spend a lot of time on them. So, and they're the kind of the last steps at the end of the week. So that would be what my typical work week in the studio would look like. And then on my weekends, I do events. So I then take my collection and I go to where my event is that Saturday or Sunday, and I build my pop-up shop. And I hopefully find some homes for some pieces, and then Monday I start back over again. It's a nice cycle.
What advice would you give to an undecided client who doesn't really know what she wants?
I would have to say that is about 50% of my clients. And what I love is when we're able to shake off, kind of start fresh, because sometimes maybe they've looked on Pinterest or someone has given them advice. And I like them to walk up to the pieces that I have available and just try on something that speaks to them. It might not even go with the outfit or the event that they're going to. But if they put on something that is speaking to them and that they think they might feel beautiful in, it's a great place to start. And that is me then able to gather some information. Maybe they're drawn towards height, or maybe they're more sculptural, or maybe they hate flowers. Some people do. And every little bit of information, the more I get to know their personality, the easier it is for me to guide them towards a piece that will be flattering. So when it works best, it's really this lovely trust exercise where they're showing me what they like and letting me guide them towards what will be the most flattering for them with what they're going to wear.
You are collaborating with theaters as well?
Yes, yes, that is really where some growth happens for me. It is wonderfully challenging, and every time I do it, it just pushes me a little more outside of my comfort zone. And it's a very different assignment for me as a designer who works for herself, because I am literally recreating someone else's sketch. They are not asking for my input. They are not asking me to be a part of the design process. They're asking me to interpret their design in a way that my materials can translate a drawing. And again, there's a lot of trust that goes in there because they don't necessarily know the materials. So keeping things in the spirit of their vision, but also in a way that still checks all my boxes as a designer, that it's flattering, that it's comfortable, that it's a little lyrical and has movement and all the wonderful things. Working with theaters is fantastic. And just recently I've started working with a cruise line that is doing theater on the ocean. They're aspiring to bring Broadway theater on the water, and it's fantastic. And their costumes are magical. And nothing I would ever do for a client. It isn't something that is wearable in any way. It is strictly fine art and sculptural and wonderful and challenging. And anytime I do a project like that, that just pushes me, I learn and I grow. And after doing this for over 20 years, those moments are still needed all the time. I don't want to be someone who's stuck in her ways. I want to keep growing.
And you are also a teacher, an instructor.
I am. So I've been on a little bit of a sabbatical recently because my business has kept me very busy, which is exciting. But I have taught millinery in a workshop environment for the better part of 15 years. And one of my specialties is a special part of millinery called blocking. And that is when you take a raw material and you shape it over a piece of wood that then creates the shape, kind of casts a mold. And that's kind of what my specialty is. And so I've been very fortunate over the past 15 years or so to have the opportunity to teach that particular skill. That's my favorite to teach. Because it's something I find very hard to learn from a book. It was something that I did not understand until my instructor showed me for the first time. And my gosh, that was 1993. And I still remember just the butterflies at seeing how that was done and being able to have a student experience like that, being able to show someone who's interested in millinery and passionate about it, but they just haven't been able to get in the classroom with somebody to be hands-on and to give the kind of feedback that I think you need when you're learning something as sculptural as millinery. Being able to tell if the felt is smoothed properly and the tension on the ropes you use and the consistency of the chemical sizing. There's a messy thing that we paint all over the straw or felt in order to help it retain its shape. And it's physical and it's messy and it's exciting. And it can be heartbreaking. And I just love it. There's something about teaching millinery, since it was so hard for me to learn. Teaching it just feels like such a beautiful part of this chapter of my life, because I don't want it to be hard for anyone else. I want people to be able to find this art and love this art and learn this art and do it successfully and do it well.
Are you still with Judy's supply store?
Yes. So that was where I last taught. And gosh, that was 2 years ago now. So last year I was unable to go teach because I've been consistently doing these high tea events here in Chicago, and I just wasn't able to take a weekend off to go teach. So hopefully this next fall, I will be able to make it work and perhaps get a workshop there again. They have a wonderful, wonderful classroom there with so many hat blocks, and um, it's a beautiful place. They've relocated. They were in Indiana, about 3 hours from Chicago, and now they're in Louisville, just outside of Louisville in LaGrange, Kentucky. So it's a little bit further commute for me, which makes it a little tricky. So up until I get back there, I occasionally still teach private classes, but I'm really looking forward to getting back into a workshop environment when I can teach a few more people at the same time.
Do you have time to travel with your art to international events?
I have not gotten to travel with my art. My art gets to travel everywhere. So I live vicariously with my art going all over the world. It gets to go to Ascot, and it gets to go to uh, the beautiful races in Australia and Saudi Arabia. It gets to go to events in New York and, of course, Kentucky, and galleries and openings. And um, my art gets to go all kinds of places. I tend to be a little bit of a homebody these days. So I have to let my art go have all the adventures. And I love to see the photos when they come in.
What are you working on right now?
Oh, so I just finished some theatrical hats. I actually just put them on my website this morning. So I just finished working with a cruise line. So I just did some pieces for them. I just finished up a hat for Royal Ascot, which was a bespoke piece, which is always exciting. They'll be in the royal enclosure, so that means I'll get to see lots of fantastic photos of that. And I'm doing a tea collection that is going to be focused towards the Kentucky Derby hat race here in the United States. That's in May. So I have a lot of pieces that I will have for purchase straight off the peg that are not bespoke. But I also do have some clients that have already sent me their dresses so that I can make custom pieces for them as well. So this is a really fun time of year. I'm doing a few Kentucky Derby events, and I'm speaking at an International Women's Day event where I'll have my hats available at their high tea as they celebrate International Women's Day. I get just to meet the neatest people doing what I do. The hat that I'm wearing, I thought I would show you the little piece of equipment that it was made on. When I cast something onto a mold, I take a piece of raw material. So this is a piece of millinery felt. So my hat started out with a big piece of felt like this. And then what it does is it gets shaped on a little wooden piece that it then casts the mold of. So that is how this little guy was made. But let me show you a couple of finished hats, and I can show you a little bit about their origin too. This is, when I keep talking about blocking, this is a hat block. You can see this big lady here. You can see she has a crown and a brim. And then this is a presser. This actually sits on top of it to help the piece of wood hold its shape. So that actually looks like a fedora out of wood. But then when it's made up, once the mold is cast and it is trimmed, this is what it would look like in felt. So this is what comes off of that piece of wood. And so this is a slightly asymmetrical fedora, a little longer on one side, got a little feather trim on her there. So this is what that mold would make in felt. And then I also cast her in straw, because you never know what weather you're going to get in Chicago. Could be a little of anything. So this is that same hat, but reproduced in straw. So just changing the materials always makes them look so differently. And this one has just a little tiny bow on her. So those would be more classic pieces that I've made. I also have a draped piece that I made, which is something that's a little less traditional. Some of the millinery material comes on bolts like fabric would. And one of my favorite materials is a kind of cloth, and it's called a cinnamon cloth. And so when you use that, you actually cut it off the bolt, and it's very easy to dye. It comes in different textures. And so I like to do things like cut bias pieces of it and dye it. And then I make kind of free-form headwear. This one is a little rose, and she has some foliage that's kind of draped and rolled in the back. And there's this lovely technique on this material. If you have a little bit of moisture on your fingers, you can roll the edges of it so it almost hems itself like a silk scarf. So the edges of this have the rolls on the cinnamon, and then she's draped. And underneath, I make these little bases to kind of hold it in place. And then it's held on with a piece of elastic, which is actually how my hat is held on right now. So that way you can kind of put it on a jaunty angle and it stays really comfortable. So those are two very different techniques. One is definitely very traditional, using the wooden hat form. And then the other one is sort of a more contemporary technique, which is kind of draping and free forming. And I just love to it. It's a very fluid, very organic process.
Is there a special designer you would like to work with?
Oh, golly molly. I've always been such a giant fan of Vivienne Westwood. I think that would just be a dream come true. I love her aesthetic. I love everything about that brand. Definitely a favorite, probably a most favorite. So I do these events at the Drake Hotel every week called Hats and High Tea. It's kind of an event I've created. The Drake Hotel is one of the most historic hotels in Chicago. Princess Diana stayed there. Marilyn Monroe stayed there. It's a 100-year-old beautiful hotel down on Michigan Avenue. And I set up a pop-up shop there every weekend where I sell my hats during high tea. And they've been very gracious to let me kind of create this event that we call Hats and High Tea with Laura Hubka, where you can make a reservation for tea, knowing that I will be there with my collection of hats. And then people are encouraged to shop the collection and try things on. They can make an appointment. They can just try. And that has become my primary source of excitement in business for these past 2 years. It's really taken off.
How much do you research a hat before you actually start doing it?
It depends on the project. If I'm doing theater, I do a lot of research. And I think that's part of what I enjoy about that part of my work. The designers send me pages and pages of just things that inspired their design. And I love that look into the process. It helps me figure out how to interpret their drawing once it's released into my hands. I love that element of research when it comes to costume design. When it comes to my collection, I'm always taking in data. I don't sketch or do a lot of research prior to making something, and that probably sounds aloof or doesn't sound very good, but I really tend to start with a material. I go into my box of materials. I look at my collection of hats at any time, almost like a gallery of paintings. And I know what I need for that collection to look right to me, to my eye. So maybe I have no buttons in my collection because I've sold my buttons. Maybe I don't have any fedoras in the collection at this time. I'd like to look at my collection as a story. Is there height? Is there movement? Are there classic hats? Are there contemporary hats? I like it to look almost like a well-curated party. Lots of different interesting people all in one place. And so every week when I go in my studio and try to decide what to make, I look at it as who isn't there? What does my collection need to be filled out? And sometimes that starts with a color or a material, but that to me is really my research is Sunday night when I sit and look at what hats are in my collection, what pieces have found new homes, and what I need for the collection to feel complete again. And that kind of, I guess, would be the little starting point that's in my head before I go into my studio and pull all the materials out and say, okay, I feel like the table could use some blue, or I feel like the table needs a little height, or something a little fresh, or something a little tricky. There tends to be adjectives that kind of tell me what needs to go in the collection to make it sing.
What can we do to have a comeback of the hat?
I think every time a woman is photographed wearing a hat, uh, for better or for worse, with social media, we are so in touch with images in real time. Every time a royal, an actress, a politician, um, anyone wears a hat and is photographed and looks comfortable and confident and a little elevated and looks like they're having fun, I think that that helps give women confidence. When I have women come up to me and they're curious and they want to try hats on, the word I hear the most is they're scared. I'd love to try a hat on, but I'm scared. And that's so telling, because you can't have a bad time when you have a hat on. You just can't. It just, and I don't have an elegant way to say it. It just makes things more fun. It is impossible to have a bad time if you're the woman in the hat at the party. And I feel like when women come up to me and tell me that they're afraid to try a hat on, or they would like to be a hat person, but they're just not sure they are, it's very vulnerable. And I don't take that lightly. So I really feel like I have this moment to help them feel comfortable, to show them that it's okay to put something on their head and to ask people to look them in the eye and to have that confidence. And I think that every time that we help a woman feel more confident, we all win. So I guess that's my very kind of long-winded way of saying every time we see someone in a hat who feels good, I just feel like it's contagious.
What motivates you?
I don't know what I would do if I didn't do this. It's the one thing that brings me joy creatively. And as a businesswoman, it's very powerful to feel that my art is something people want to spend their money on. It's really humbling. And I don't know that I ever will get used to that. It's such a gift to be able to do what you love and to support yourself doing that. And I feel very strongly that I'm not to take that for granted, that I maybe am not the most talented milliner out there, but I am very willing to work my tail off to be able to keep this as my occupation and to keep it moving forward. So I just really treat my career as a gift, and I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm not afraid of blistered hands that are possibly stained purple at any point in time. I think I just want it a lot, and I'm willing to work for it, and that is very motivating to see the success that I've been very blessed to get as a result of that.
Do you have a motto, like a mantra, that keeps you going?
I do, and it's not really refined. It is actually from Finding Nemo, and it's on a piece of masking tape stuck on my sewing machine, and it says, "Just keep swimming." And I have lived by that for the past 20 years of my career. Good hats, bad hats, recessions, too much work, not enough work. As long as I have something that I feel passionate about and I feel that I've been gifted with, just going to keep making hats. It makes me happy, and I have to believe that this is my purpose. So even when it's the worst day in the studio and the hat isn't coming together and my materials are late and maybe a client isn't understanding the concept of something I have designed, and it could be a rough day, I still tell myself it's still a really rough day doing the world's greatest job. And I believe that. So I just keep swimming. I mean, my life is pretty much, theater, and then my tea events have just taken over my world. I mean, that has really been probably the best change I've made in the past 10 years, is getting away from working with stores and just doing a pop-up business model. And as an artist, I've been recommending that to anyone who will listen to me, because to cut out that retail element of it has been really lifting. It's really helped me keep my business propelled forward. But I've kind of just become known as the Chicago high tea hat lady. And there's worse things to be known as. I mean, that's kind of my very simple chaotic small business life these days is just making hats and going to high tea and buying wonderful dresses and then doing theater work when I can work it in. It's a pretty simple, untraditional life, but it's the right balance. I've had to remove a lot of things. I used to have a children's line and I had to move that away. I used to do newborn hats. I had to take that away. Stepping back from a little bit of the teaching right now while the sale part of it is kind of having a renaissance, growing a whole lot. A little hard to control these days. Like that's, it's been a great problem to have, but it's still a problem. I still have to navigate it. So growth has been fantastic, but as someone who makes their own materials, it's kind of isolating. It's, I can do an event at a country club. I'm doing one this weekend. I'm doing an event at a country club where I'm there with my friend who has beautiful pajamas, but they're made in India. Most of the vendors there will have their things provided by third parties, and I'm the dingbat that's sitting there sewing the night before trying to get one more hat on the table. So it just kind of puts me in a different position when I work with other people in those environments because most of them are not making their own inventory and then staffing their own events. I have very much had to become the face of my brand, whether I like it or not. People come to tea and they expect to meet Laura from Hats and High Tea with Laura. And I've just had to put my lip gloss on and get over my shyness and just go with it because it's given me the ability to do the job that I want. So yeah, it's a strange world I've created, but I kind of like it.